When last we left Yuka, she was on the road, scouting for the Camden caravan. She'd spoken with villagers, and she had stumbled across something. One was a tangible memory from her mother. The other was a message from a friend. Tikanni. Yuka barely dared believe it. She stood, crouched in the snow, wetness seeping into her knees and sleeves. Her eyes were drawn to the broken oar and fighting axe, like a beetle to the flame. One oarsman was left, out of the camp of men that pulled around its boats. One body was not among those that lay dead before the hanging tree. He has to be near. At this thought, Yuka's neck lost its stiffness, and she turned her head slowly to the left, and then to the right. Seeing nothing, instinct brought her eyes to the ground. Other than a small couple of gouge marks in the snow around the axe and oar, there were no other footprints, no marks of movement. Yuka had never heard of any spirits on the wind, leaving an axe for the living. Was this a sign of some sort, an omen from the green? A broken oar, and an axe that should have been at the bottom of some unnamed creek, Yuka thought to herself. She wasn't sure what to make of it. The calling of her name sent her diving for the tree trunk and her mother's axe. Yuka hurriedly stuck the handheld axe into the fold of her coat. She heard the crunch of snow and the breaking of twigs. Beginning to panic, Yuka hurriedly buried the broken oar under the snow and rock around the tree where her mother's axe had rested. She knelt there for a long while, under the low branches, waiting for the footsteps to get closer. For a long moment she heard nothing but the wind through the ice and trees. She knew that Lusa would be looking for her soon if she did not show up. I am not yet a captive, but I am under their wing, she thought to herself. She wondered whether or not this was her chance to flee the oddities of the Camden caravan. Was Tikanni near enough for her to fall in with him? Was he well? There was no blood in the snow, she remembered. If the salty tree oak of a man had truly had the speed and silence to leave these items for her to find, Yuka believed that the man must not be near death, as she had feared. We could take off together and make for the others, the Light Rider and Nanak. Yuka wondered briefly how young Immerse was faring with their group's hard journey ahead. Would Tikanni even go back to them? She thought to herself. Yuka knew that she could not command the war dog. Tikanni had left their camp with bile in his heart for the Light Rider, and facing the tip of Nanak's spears. Could we make Tungyuk together, just he and I? Doubt clouded Yuka's heart from every direction. Before she could plot any new paths for herself, the sound of crunching snow filled her ears again. This one was a great deal closer. The steps were careful, slow. Yuka reached back into her coat and gripped the cold haft of her axe. The feeling gave a comfort she had not felt in days. She slowed the pace of her breathing, keeping track of the sound of the nearing steps. Feeling a moment of instinct guide her actions, Yuka sprang from under the low branches of the tree and looked around. Two beetle-black eyes, standing about half her height above the ground, squinted suspiciously up at her. 15 paces away, Yuka saw the thick, blubberous form of a snow boar. She had only ever seen one from afar, when she had been 4 summers old. These beasts preferred the colder winters, and they only ventured as far south as the cliffs of the Copper Shards when winter was in full reign. That time, it had been a plump mother and 2 small piglets with her. The one before her was a young male. Its shoulders rolled with muscle as the animal paced back at her movement. Its fat hindquarters jiggled at its heavy breathing. Yuka knew it would be foolish to antagonize the beast. Snow boars were good to hunt, but spears and spitfires are usually needed to bring one down. It was not the season of mating, so Yuka doubted that the animal's blood was up, which was something. Carefully, she took a step back around the tree. The snow boar raised its large snout, snorting and sniffing the air at her movement. He looked more curious than angry. The thick animal took a small step forward. No sooner had its front hoof broken through the snow than the entire left side of its face blew apart. A thunderous crack sent Yuka jumping to the side back under the tree. Along with the echoing roar of the Spitfire, Yuka heard the dying squeal of the male boar and its heavy body slump sideways into the snow. The poor animal stopped moving in seconds. Yuka rolled to her side, looking up again through the low branches of the tree. In the dive, her hood had come off, letting her long red locks, clicking with copper rings, fall free. A man spoke, emitting a harsh laugh from another. Yuka saw the two jailers that were her and Lusa's guardians walk into view from behind a large bush a few paces away. The one with the large black mustache was cradling a long-barreled Spitfire in the crook of his arm. The two of them were looking around the dead snow boar, looking for something other than their kill. Yuka felt a sickly twist in her guts. The younger, bright-haired man began to whistle out, like calling to a stray animal. The other called out one heavily accented word in her tongue. "Girl!" He said it over and over. "Girl! Girl! Girl!" Yuka waited there, thinking to herself, "I am no prey." She was about to walk out brazenly from under the tree, mother's axe in hand, ready for anything, but was held back at the sound of a woman speaking Camden. The two jailers turned back behind them to see Lusa standing on a small hill back towards where the creek and their mounts were. The woman pointed towards the kill and motioned for them to pick it up. The two jailers looked at each other. They spoke in hushed voices, but moved to do whatever Lusa had bid them do. Yuka watched them from under the cover of the tree branches. She marveled at the strength of the two men as they knelt and hefted the thick dead creature by its hind legs and dragged it with little difficulty back towards Lusa and the creek bed. She waited until the two men had dragged the animal and themselves back over the snowy hill before she made her move. Keeping low to the ground, her knees bent, Yuka moved through the snowy forest underbrush, keeping her speed matched with her silence. Though she kept her body low, she kept her eyes high toward the bare icy canopy of the duskwood branches. There had been no footprints around her mother's axe, nor the broken lurker bone oar. Tikanni was not yet some spirit of the green wind. Yuka was sure of this now. The man was green-born, she thought to herself, like me. He would know how to climb and how to make trees his forest footpath. Yuka looked around wildly, following the path she knew she would have taken had she been the one skulking about the web of ice-slicked branches. Most of these duskwood trees held no leaves during the winter season, but many branches still held thick coats of snow and were thorned in icicles. One who knew the wisdom of duskwood could hide themselves from any who did not know the green. It was the third tree that Yuka looked under that she saw any sign. She had almost missed it entirely. The tree was shorter than the one that held her mother's fury and the broken lurker oar. It was grown in slanting earth just southwards from the higher tree. On a branch midway up the tree trunk, Yuka saw a bare patch of duskwood bark. The patch of wood was small, but apparent in the bright white layer of ice that surrounded it. It was the sort of mark that a hard-soled boot would make if it was gouging into the ice at speed. Just beyond it, on a slightly higher branch, were two other marks like it, but smaller. Yuka ran for the tree, looking around. Her heart was pounding in her chest. The blood rush at possibly finding Tikanni was sending throbbing pains in her mending nose and wounded temple. She knew that she only had a little time before Lusa and the grotesque jailers would be looking for her. Yuka hurried through the trees to find where Tikanni might have moved after. As she had waited beside the first tree, the cruel sky above had turned gray, then white, bringing with it snow that began to fall in sheets. The flakes began small, falling in thin layers, but Yuka could tell that more was coming. She could taste the cold on the air. Looking around the second tree, she found no other duskwood that was large enough to hold Tikanni. Frustrated, as the snowflakes and deluge both thickened around her, Yuka turned her eyes to the ground around the second tree. Ahead of her, farther southward, down the slanting rocky earth around the tree, Yuka saw two deep footprints in a small ring of disturbed snow. She pictured the gray man hurling himself from the second tree and coming down hard onto the ground. Looking past the marks in the snow, she saw more prints ahead, leading down the slanting hillside and curving down towards the creek. Yuka's party had stopped towards the creek. Yuka's party had stopped by to water the horses. She quickened her pace. The snow on the ground down the hillside was thicker than higher up, and Yuka had to bring her knees up a little higher as she ran. She followed the path all the way down to a small drop where the land met the creek. On the slanted hillside, the raised land had been carved in two by the creek over time. Yuka looked down over the edge. The water was less than the height of a man below her, but it was too wide to jump to the other side. She doubted that even Tikanni could have thrown himself to the other side. Yuka felt frustration begin to fester in her gut as she saw no more prints around her. The snow was getting too thick to see any distance, and from all she could tell, Tikanni had recklessly hidden his trail by taking to the water, despite the cold. Frustration gave way to anger as Yuka looked around for any further sign of the man. Why does he not speak to me? She thought. Why run? Why leave me to the Camden, believe a hidden trace of your presence? Yuka wondered if the man was a fool, or if he had gone mad at the loss of his chief and his men in so short of time. Perhaps I have put my hope in a mind that has been lost to madness. On the wind, she heard a woman call out her name somewhere farther up the hill. She gave the raised, icy creek bed another last look before turning back uphill, following the creek northward to where she knew the others and the mounts were waiting. For a legend, you're damn useless when it comes to foraging. Lusa was helping the mustached jailer skin the thick, hairy hide of the boar. Both man and woman were bloody up to their elbows. The younger jailer was busy with his mount. Yuka did her best to look rueful at approaching their sorry camp. Did you find the beast that was cawing? No, Yuka said, and perhaps she never will. Lusa took a thick-bladed hunting knife from her belt and sliced a small hunk of meat off of the flank of the dead snow boar. Well, hurry and take this on the point of your dagger. Eat fast, then we ride hard for the caravan. Yuka looked at the fatty piece of snow boar dripping red from Lusa's hand into the snow. Am I to eat it raw, then? Lusa gave a bemused look at Yuka's words. No daughter of the Greeneress has lived through her child years without tasting the blood of the land, fresh. This is not your first raw boar, I'm sure. That had been true enough. Yuka remembered the raw, bloody taste of the lurker god flesh that was cut from the beast she had ridden out of the ice. She was reminded of how much that flesh had tasted of copper. Lusa seemed to be able to see Yuka's hesitation. Here. She produced a small horn that had been hollowed out and stoppered at the fat end with leather capping. Lusa uncapped the brass lid that made the tip of the horn and poured from the hollow horn a small dose of deep black powder into her gloved hand. Smiling at the confused look at Yuka's face, Lusa sprinkled the black powder over the red and white meat of the dead boar. She held the meat out once more for Yuka. Yuka took it and held the meat up to her nose. The smell from the black powder had a strange, smoky sweetness to it. The smell was familiar to her. Spitfires! This is the black powder you would put in a Spitfire. Lusa nodded. Aye. Something that brings death to meat can also give life to it. Lusa chuckled and cut a hunk of meat off for her. She sprinkled more of the same powder onto her own portion and took a generous bite. A little blood dribbled down onto her chin. She nodded at the meat now in Yuka's hand. Hurry now, girl. That's all the food between now and nightfall. We take the rest of the boar back for the smoke wagon. I've eaten the flesh of a god. Why does this balk me? Yuka tore off a hunk with her teeth, feeling the odd grit of the black powder under her tongue. Blood filled her mouth as she chewed the boar muscle. The flavor was not terrible. Once the gritty texture of the powdered meat passed, the taste had a sharp saltiness to it. It matched well with the rich taste of the animal's fat. Yuka swallowed. Black Camden tea in the morning, Spitfire meat at midday. What will I have for supper? Her hunger was awakened by the first bite, and she made quick work of the small, messy meal. Right. Lusa finished her last bite and turned to the two jailers. She called out, pointing back towards where the caravan would be lumbering along down the hills. The two jailers glared at Lusa for a moment, then moved to mount their steeds. The snowfall had begun to thicken all around them. Yuka was having trouble seeing farther than a few paces in front of her. As she mounted, she felt the cruel north wind raise its voice from the nearby mountains. The cold was biting. "Ride fast, but not stupidly. Make sure that you do not lose sight of my mount's arse," Lusa called out on the wind. Yuka hurriedly put her hood over her head and tightened the mouth and neck covering of her coat. "This season is early and it's coming," she thought. Yuka would not have expected the cold, this severe, this far south, for another few weeks at least. The riding back towards the caravan was far more daunting than the ride to the village. Most of the journey was uphill, while the wind was against them. Yuka leaned against the muscular neck of her mount, trying to shield her eyes from the wind, while trying to keep their riding in the same direction on the flanks of Lusa's mount. The caravan has been moving as well, albeit more slowly, Yuka thought determinedly. They cannot be much farther now. The hope of more garlicky meat stew and the comfort of a tent made the raw meat, peppered with spitfire dust in her belly, feel pitiful. The wind was so loud around them now that Yuka could not even hear if the two jailers were still behind him. She dared not look back to check. In the pit of her stomach, an odd unease was forming as the snowstorm around them grew worse. Yuka knew winter. She was experienced enough to know the difference between cold that could kill you and cold that would not. It was not the cold that sent a shiver through her with every gale, though. There was something on the wind, something fearful. Dead winds come from the sky. Wind of spirit comes from the green. This was an old green proverb she had learned very young. The wind is dead, and sky-born, she felt. Despite her eyes watering from the windy onslaught, Yuka felt the urge to look up and around. She saw the silent flash, but what set her bones shaking was the crashing noise that followed. The roar. A great, rumbling avalanche of sound, like the guttering of some great bloated, fell god, was carried to the small party on the next wave of snowy wind. Yuka could see, through the icy veil of falling snow, Lusa sit up straighter in her saddle. The woman turned. Lusa's eyes, framed by her hood and own mouth covering, met Yuka's. It was the first time that the girl had ever seen fear cross them. Thunder. Common in the southern cliffs during the brief summer seasons, did not happen in winter. When the sky had its say, it always only brought silent death in snow and the killing winds. The world above would turn black and the snow would fall in amounts enough to drown a mountain, but the wind was all that was ever heard. When there was thunder, when lightning cracked, and the sky roared, despair was not behind when snow fell with it. No omen was worse in the green, no augury it spelt more danger. Death followed snow thunder. Doom, blood, and pain. Yuka's mother had once spent 4 months in seclusion in the green temple of their village after she had seen lightning crack across the sky during the first storm of that winter. That same winter, their village had joined the other villages of the Halo tribe in a terrible war against the Horn tribes of the Coves. Lusa kicked her heels into her mount. Yuka's own mount lurched ahead to keep up with the new speed. Yuka spoke a prayer to the green, hoping that the sound carried on the sky's dead wind, that they would reach the caravan soon. The sky above was getting darker with every stride of Yuka's mount. Yuka could hear the heavy breathing of the animal below her as he did his best to gallop his way through the thickening floor of snow on the path before them. Another great flash of light surged above them, drawing Yuka's gaze upward. The jagged sky fang of lightning cut through the black clouds. It was in that light that Yuka saw it again. A lurker in the sky. The memory of the sight sent a painful pang through the still healing wound on her temple. The image of something black and ovular had seemed like a fever dream as she had lain prone after the first encounter with the white-painted sky criers. This time was far more clear, but it was gone in an instant. Yuka could swear that she saw, framed by the monstrous black clouds above, a massive, lurker-shaped thing drifting amidst the tempest. When the lightning faded, Yuka squinted but could not find the shape again in the darkness. "The sky sends me an evil vision," she thought. The heart-rending blast of thunder soon followed, but it had taken longer to follow the lightning than the previous blasts. Yuka was beginning to think that they would surely be stranded out there in the storm, the snow too thick all around, before they could make it to camp. A night in this, with thunder crackling around us, the thought terrified her. Her hope was found in wood smoke. The sweet, homey scent was unmistakable through the storm. Yuka could not see far enough ahead to find any trails of smoke. The sky was still too dark, and the snow too thick, but she knew a cook fire when she smelled one. The tension she had felt began to ebb slightly at the thought of the hot meal. Death omen or not, I can still eat. Despite the hope, she could not let herself relax fully. She did not know what would follow that snow thunder. I'd ride with strangers, and I brought fear from the sky. Yuka reached inside her coat and once again wrapped her fingers around the haft of her mother's axe. The act calmed her a bit further. "Not far now." The gales were not so forceful as before, and Yuka could make out Lusa's voice. "We'll beat the night yet." Her words proved prophetic. As Lusa finished her sentence, Yuka heard the world around her exhale. Wind subsided, snow slowly thinned, and there was a thin blade of golden light on the horizon before them. The sky above was still black as the night, but the sunset beyond showed that the storm's end was in sight. Yuka could now make out thin trails of smoke above the tree line ahead of them. There were new smells on the wind, along with the wood smoke: meat, bread, and butter. And garlic. Yuka could feel her mouth begin to water as Lusa led them through a snowy clearing with level ground. The storm had all but subsided now. Aside from a small dusting of powdery ice floating around, there was almost nothing to speak to the sky's previous deadly call. "Yuka!" The high, melodic voice startled Yuka so much that she almost fell out of her saddle. She instinctively pulled back on the reins, earning an angry neigh from her mount along with an aggressive shake of its head. Loud whickering and angry curses in Camden told Yuka that the two jailers had reined up behind them. Lusa reined in her mount as well, turning towards the noise. Yuka turned to see Ennui, perched atop a mount smaller than her own. Both were standing on the edge of an enormous rock that was jutting from the wide hillside to their right. Yuka felt further calm at seeing the young, bright-haired girl and raised her hand to wave at her. "Damn it all, what is she doing riding alone?" Yuka heard Lusa speak behind her. The thought troubled Yuka as well. What business could this girl have away from the camp, alone? Ennui was smiling happily and waving frantically down at them. She called out Yuka's name again. Yuka was glad that the wind had died down, or they may not have seen or heard her at all. All that sounded around them now was the cawing of some great bird. Yuka turned her mount to ride up the hill towards the girl. If she rode here alone, she will not ride back the same way. She was about to call out to Ennui when another crack split the world around them. More snow thunder, Yuka thought, but she was wrong. This had been louder, closer, and quicker. Yuka watched as Ennui was thrown from atop her mount. The little girl looked like she had been grabbed by some invisible giant and hurled to the side. Her body hit the sloped, snowy ground hard and began to roll down the hill towards them. Yuka kicked her heels into her mount, hearing a great scream of anger and anguish coming towards her. She saw Aglu crumpled under the black spitfires in her mind's eye. No, not again. Never again. Yuka did not see if the others followed her. She kicked the flanks of her animal hard, driving it up the steep hill towards the girl. She